Hi, welcome to the lesson for Chapter 8. We're going to continue reading the chapter today and wrap up the questions. So I just want to remind you, you have one question left in the comprehension check, and that is, do you believe that it was TJ's fault that Mama got fired? Or do you believe TJ's claim that he had nothing to do with it? And be sure to explain your answers using text details and remind you these are ACE answers. You need to make sure that you're giving me at least 5 sentences here. All right. Down at the bottom in part 2, we're going to get to a point where we can start filling in some of this chart. We're planning for our next quick write, which you may or may not have seen already. You're going to be putting quotes in this column. You're going to pull out an event that occurs in the classroom that leads to Mama getting fired, an action TJ takes that leads to the Board of Education getting involved, and then what Mama tells the family. On this column, you're going to explain those. So as we're reading, I will help you identify those if you choose. And once again, this video is a choice. You can certainly read on your own this chapter if you wish. We are on page 181. Cassie Logan. Yes, Miss Crocker? That's the 3rd time I've caught you daydreaming this morning. Just because you managed to come in first on the examinations last week doesn't mean a thing this week. We're in a new quarter and everyone's slate is clean. You'll make no A's by daydreaming. You understand that? Yes'm, I said, not bothering to add that she repeated herself so much that all a body had to do was listen to the first few minutes of her lesson to be free to daydream to her heart's content. I think you'd better sit in the back where you're not so comfortable, she said. Then maybe you'll pay more attention. But Miss Crocker raised her hand, indicating that she did not want to hear another word, and banished me to the very last row in front of the window. I slid onto the cold seat after its former occupant had eagerly left it for my warm quarters by the stove. I was thinking there for a minute, why would she not want to be in the back of the room? That's where you guys always want to be. Why would you want to be in the front? There's a stove there keeping them warm. So being in the back, she's going to be cold. As soon as Miss Crocker turned away, I mumbled a few indignant phrases, then hugged my Christmas sweater to me. I tried to pay attention to Miss Crocker, but the cold creeping under the windowsill made it impossible. Unable to bear the draft, I decided to line the sill with paper from my notebook. I ripped out the paper, then turned to the window. As I did, a man passed under it and disappeared. The man was Caleb Wallace. I raised my hand. Ms. Crocker, may I be excused, please, ma'am? Well, you know. As soon as I had escaped Miss Crocker, I dashed to the front of the building. Caleb Wallace was standing in front of the 7th grade class building, talking to Mr. Welliver, and 2 white men, whom I couldn't make out from where I stood. When the men entered the building, I turned and sped to the rear and carefully climbed onto the woodpile stacked behind it. I peeked cautiously through a broken window into Mama's classroom. The men were just entering. Caleb Wallace first, followed by a man I didn't know, and Mr. Harlan Granger. Mama seemed startled to see the men, but when Mr. Granger said, "Been hearing about your teaching, Mary. So as members of the school board, we thought we'd come by and learn something." She merely nodded and went on with her lesson. Mr. Welliver left the room, returning shortly with 3 folding chairs for the visitors. He himself remained standing. Mama was in the middle of history, and I knew that was bad. I could tell Stacy knew it too. He sat tense near the back of the room, his lips very tight, his eyes on the men. But Mama did not flinch. She always started her history class the first thing in the morning when the students were most alert, and I knew that the hour was not yet up. To make matters worse, her lesson for the day was slavery. She spoke on the cruelty of it, of the rich economic cycle it generated as slaves produced the raw products for the factories of the North and Europe, how the country profited and grew from the free labor of a people still not free. Before she had finished, Mr. Granger picked up a student's book. flipped it open to the pasted over front cover, and pursed his lips. What did he just notice? Thought these books belonged to the county, he said, interrupting her. Mama glanced over at him, but did not reply. Mr. Granger turned the pages, stopped, and read something. I don't see all them things you're teaching in here. That's because they're not in there, Mama said. Well, if it ain't in here, then you got no right teaching it. This book's approved by the Board of Education, and you're expected to teach what's in it. I can't do that. And why not? Mama, her back straight and her eyes fixed on the men, answered, because all that's in that book isn't true. Mr. Granger stood. He laid the book back on the student's desk and headed for the door. The other board members and Caleb Wallace followed. At the door, Mr. Granger stopped and pointed at Mama. You must be some kind of smart, Mary, to know more than the fellow who wrote that book. Smarter than the school board, too, I reckon. Mama remained silent, and Mr. Welliver gave her no support. In fact, Mr. Granger continued, putting on his hat, you so smart, I expect you'd best just forget about teaching altogether. Then that away, you'll have plenty of time to write your own book. With that, he turned his back on her, glanced at Mr. Welliver to make sure his meaning was clear, and left with the others behind him. So, take a minute, pause the video if you need to. Between these last two pages, there are several instances, things that happened in the classroom that led to the Board of Education choosing to fire her. What were their reasonings? Okay, and there's more than one. Make sure that you explain in the other column, and you can certainly explain all of it, but make sure that you pull a quote. When you're ready, come on back and join me on page 185. We waited for Mama after school was out. Stacy had sent TJ and Claude on, and the four of us, silent and patient, were sitting on the steps when Mama emerged. She smiled down at us, seemingly not surprised that we were there. I looked up at her, but I couldn't speak. I had never really thought much about Mama's teaching before. That was just part of her being Mama. But now that she could not teach, I felt resentful and angry, and I hated Mr. Granger. You all know, she asked. We nodded as she slowly descended the stairs. Stacy took one handle of her heavy black satchel, and I took the other. Christopher John and Little Man each took one of her hands, and we started across the lawn. Mama, said Christopher John, when we reached the road, can't you ever teach one more? Mama did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice was muffled. Somewhere else, maybe, but not here, at least not for a while. Well, how's come, Mama? Demanded Little Man. How's come? Mama bit into her lower lip and gazed at the road. Because, baby, she said finally, I taught things some folks just didn't want to hear. When we reached home, Papa and Mr. Morrison were both in the kitchen with Big Ma drinking coffee. As we entered, Papa searched our faces. His eyes settled on Mama, and pain was in her face. What's wrong? He asked. Mama sat down beside him. She pushed back a strand of hair that had worked its way free of the chignon, but it fell back into her face again, and she left it there. I got fired. Big Ma put down her cup weakly without a word. Papa reached out and touched Mama. She said, Harlan Granger came to the school with Caleb Wallace and one of the school board members. Somebody had told them about those books I'd pasted over, but that was only an excuse. They're just getting at us any way they can because of shopping in Vicksburg. Her voice cracked. What'll we do, David? We needed that job. So pause for a minute, because this answers the one question in the chart as well, and really there's only one answer that you can put in there. So looking real quick, an event that, nope, next one, an action, nope, down at the bottom. What Mama tells the family about why she got fired. Is it because she pasted the covers of the books? Now that's one of the ones that was up here that we could include, right? But is that the main reason? And based on previous chapters, we know that's not. Harlan Granger had come and warned, threatened them of other possibilities too. Oh, your mortgage might come due, etc. And here's just another way to be able to prevent them from being able to pay the bills and possibly of him being able to get their land. And he's getting back at them for taking the money from that store, right? All right. Papa gently pushed the stray hair back over her ear. We'll get by. Oh, I skipped part. I'm sorry. Her voice cracked. What'll we do, David? We needed that job. Papa gently pushed the stray hair back over her ear. We'll get by. Plant more cotton, maybe, but we'll get by. There was quiet reassurance in his voice. Mama nodded and stood. Where are you going, child? Big Ma asked. Outside. I want to walk for a bit. Christopher John, little man, and I turned to follow her, but Papa called us back. Leave your mama be, he said. As we watched her slowly cross the backyard to the barren garden and head toward the south pasture, Mr. Morrison said, You know, with you here, Mr. Logan, you got no need of me. Maybe there's work to be had around here. Maybe I could get something, help you out. Papa stared across at Mr. Morrison. There's no call for you to do that, he said. I'm not paying you anything as it is. Mr. Morrison said softly. I got me a nice house to live in, the best cooking a man could want, and for the first time in a long time, I got me a family. That's right good pay, I'd say. Papa nodded. You're a good man, Mr. Morrison, and I thank you for the offer, but I'll be leaving in a few weeks, and I'd rather you was here. His eyes focused on Mama again, a tiny figure in the distance now. Papa, rasped Christopher John, moving close to him, Mama gonna be all right? Papa turned and putting his arms around Christopher John drew him even nearer. Son, your mama, she's born to teaching like the sun is born to shine. And it's gonna be hard on her not teaching anymore. It's gonna be real hard because ever since she was a wee bitty girl down in the Delta, she wanted to be a teacher. And Grandpa wanted her to be one too, didn't he, Papa? Said Christopher John. Papa nodded. Your mama was his baby child, and every penny he'd get his hands on, he'd put it aside for her schooling. And that wasn't easy for him either, because he was a tenant farmer, and he didn't see much cash money. But he promised your grandmama before she died to see that your mama got an education. And when your mama come high school age, she sent her up to Jackson to school, then on to her teacher training school. It was just because he died her last year of schooling that she come up here to teach instead of going back to the Delta. And y'all got married and she ain't gone back down no more. There no more, interjected Little Man. Papa smiled faintly at Little Man and stood up. That's right, son. She was too smart and pretty to let get away. He stooped and looked out the window again, then back at us. She's a strong, fine woman, your mama. And this thing won't keep her down, but it's hurt her bad. So I want y'all to be extra thoughtful for the next few days. And remember what I told you. You hear? Yes, sir, Papa, we answered. Papa left us then and went onto the back porch. There he leaned against the porch pillar for several minutes, staring out toward the pasture. But after a while, he stepped into the yard and crossed the garden to join Mama. Here we get into the part about TJ. TJ, you sure? Stacy asked little Willie Wiggins at recess the next day. Little Willie nodded morosely and answered, heard it myself. Clarence, too, was standing right upside him at the store when he told Mr. Caleb. Come talking about how Ms. Logan failed him on purpose and then said she wasn't a good teacher and that she the one stopped everybody from coming up to the store. Said she was destroying school property, talking about them books, you know. Who's gonna take him? I cried. Hush, Cassie, said Stacy. How come you just telling this now, little Willie? Little Willie shrugged. Guess I got fooled by old TJ Clarence and me. We told him we was going to tell it soon as we left the store, but TJ asked us not to do it. Said he was going right back and tell them it wasn't nothing but a joke, what he said. And he went back too, and I thought nothing was going to come of it. He hesitated, then confessed. Didn't say nothing about it before because me and Clarence wasn't supposed to be up there ourselves. But then here come Mr. Granger yesterday and fires Ms. Logan. I figure that's TJ's doing. He probably figured it too, I said. That's why he ain't in school today. Talking about he's sick, said Christopher John. If he ain't now, he gonna be, prophesied little man, his tiny fists balled for action, round here telling on Mama. After school, when Claude turned up the forest trail leading to the Avery house, we went with him. As we emerged from the forest into the Avery yard, the house appeared deserted. But then we spied TJ lazily swinging, straddle-legged atop an inner tube hanging from an old oak in the front yard. Stacy immediately charged toward him, and when TJ saw him coming, he tried to swing his long right leg over the tube to escape. He didn't make it. Stacy jumped up on the inner tube, giving them both a jerky ride before they landed hard on Mrs. Avery's azalea bush. Man, what's the matter with you? TJ cried as he rolled from under Stacy to glance back at the flattened bush. My mama gonna kill me when she sees that bush. Stacy jumped up and jerked at TJ's collar. Was you the one? Did you do it? TJ looked completely bewildered. Do what? What you talking about? Did you tell it? You tell them Wallaces about Mama? Me? Asked TJ. Me? Why, man, you ought to know me better than that. He do know you, I said. How come you think we up here? Hey, now, wait a minute, objected TJ. I don't know what somebody been telling y'all, but I ain't told them Wallaces nothing. You was down there, Stacy accused. The day Mama caught you cheating, you went down to them Wallaces. That don't mean nothing, said TJ, jerking away from Stacy's grip and hopping to his feet. My daddy says I can go down there if I wanna. Don't mean I told them old folks nothing, though. Heard you told them all sorts of things, like Mama didn't know nothing and she wasn't even teaching what she's supposed to. Didn't neither, denied TJ. Ain't never said that. All I said was that it was her that... His voice trailed off as he realized he'd said too much. And he began to laugh uneasily. Hey, y'all, look, I don't know how come Ms. Logan got fired, but I ain't said nothing to make nobody fire her. All I said was that she failed me again. A fellow got a right to be mad about something like that, ain't he? Stacy's eyes narrowed upon TJ. Maybe, he said, but he ain't got no right to go running his mouth off about things he ain't supposed to be told. TJ stepped backward and looked nervously over his shoulder to the south, where the fields lay fallow. The rutted wagon trail which cut through the fields leading from the distant Granger mansion revealed a thin woman stepping briskly toward us. TJ seemed to take heart from the figure and grew cocky again. Don't know who's been telling, but it ain't been me. A moment's silence passed, and then Stacy, his eyes cold and condemning, said quietly, "It was you all right, TJ. It was you." Then turning, he motioned us back toward the forest. You gonna beat him up? Cried a disappointed little man. What he got coming to him is worse than a beating, replied Stacy. What could be worse than that? Asked Christopher John. You'll see, said Stacy, and so will TJ. TJ's first day back at school, after almost a week's absence, was less than successful. Avoiding us in the morning, he arrived late, only to be shunned by the other students. At first, he pretended that the students' attitude didn't matter, but by the afternoon, when school was out, he hurried after us, attempting to convince us that he was merely a victim of circumstances. Hey, y'all, ain't gonna hold what little Willie said against me, are you? He asked. You still saying what little Willie said ain't true? Questioned Stacy. Why, shoot, yeah, he exclaimed. When I catch up with that little rascal, I'm going to beat him to a pulp. Round here, everybody telling everybody I got Ms. Logan fired. Ain't nobody ever speaking to me no more. Little Willie probably told them Wallace's hisself. So he figures to get out of it by telling everybody it was, oh, stop lying, TJ, I said testily. Don't nobody believe you. Well, I should have known you wouldn't, Cassie. You never liked me no way. Well, anyway, that's the truth. I agreed. But, said TJ, grinning again, and turning toward Little Man and Christopher John, my little buddy Christopher John believes me, don't you, fellow? And you still my pal, ain't you, Little Man? An indignant Little Man looked up at TJ, but before he could speak, easygoing Christopher John said, you told on Mama, TJ. Now she all unhappy because she can't teach school no more, and it's all your fault. And we don't like you no more. Yeah, added Little Man in agreement. TJ stared down at Christopher John, not believing that he had said that. Then he laughed uneasily. I don't know what's got into you folks. Everyone's gone crazy. Look, Stacy said, stopping. First, you run off with the mouth to them Wallaces, and now you blaming little Willie for what you done. Why don't you just admit it was you? Hey, man, TJ exclaimed, grinning his easy grin. But then finding that the grin and the smooth words no longer worked, his face dropped. All right. So maybe what if I did say something about Ms. Logan? Can't even remember saying nothing about it, but both little Willie and Clarence said I did, then maybe I did. Anyways, I'm real sorry about your mama losing her job, and all of us, including Claude, stared distastefully at TJ and walked away from him. Hey, wait. I said I was sorry, didn't I? He asked, following us. Look, what's a fella got to do anyway? Hey, y'all, look. This here is still old TJ. I ain't changed. Y'all can't turn on me just because. You the one turned, TJ, Stacy called over his shoulder. Now leave us alone. We don't want no more to do with you. TJ, for the first time, comprehending that we were no longer his friends, stopped. Then, standing alone in the middle of the road, he screamed after us. Who needs y'all anyway? I've been tired of y'all always hanging around for a long while now. But I've been too nice to tell you. I should have known better. What I look like, having a bunch of little kids around all the time, and me here 14, near grown. We walked on, not stopping. Got me better friends than y'all. They give me things and treat me like I'm a man, and they white too. His voice faded into the wind as we left him, and we heard no more. Now, you have your information about TJ, and you need to make your decision as to whether or not it was his fault. One of the things I want to point out at the end of this chapter, so we just finished chapter 8, you're going to have a quiz on chapters 5 through 8 before we move on to chapter 9. And unfortunately, I am really nervous that we may not move on to chapter 9 until after Christmas break. And I realize this is being kind of drawn out. But I want to point out some foreshadowing and have you thinking about what could come next. So they have said they don't want anything to do with TJ. And he just let them know he's got other friends anyways. And they're white. Talks about how they treat him, etc. Think about the statement that Papa made earlier with Stacy about why they don't always make friends with white people. How could this be foreshadowing some things that could happen to TJ in the future? All right, wrapped up chapter 8. Get your questions done and answered and turned in, and I will see you soon.